Gojo Satoru is the strongest failure in modern shonen history, and I know that sentence alone is it's something that is very, very likely to get me cancelled by the rabid, grieving Gojo stands on the internet right now. And before you all turn up outside my gaff, hear me out. I want to make it very, very clear. I actually really love Gojo. I love the character, and the basis of this video is coming from genuinely a place of love and a place of wanting to analyze a very complex character and taking a look at the overall character of Gojo and seeing what made him fail at every moment where it mattered the most. You see, from the very start, Gojo had immense pressure on him. His very birth literally changed the balance of power in the world of Jujutsu Kaisen, and yet even with his mere presence alone achieving this, Gojo himself and the actions he consciously taken along the way always left him in the back end of the losing bracket. And Gojo, it was a failure in the moments where it mattered the most, and arguably his biggest fault within Gojo's life was during his earliest years with his best friend Geto. There's many factors within this, but Gojo's pre-existing belief that protecting the weak was inherently pointless and that he hates doing that stuff. We've seen a similar ideal to someone else within the series, and that being Sukuna. Sukuna, at one point, even outright told Gojo that a hierarchy based on nothing but strength is boring. But somewhere down the line, Gojo switched up. He switched up on his mentality, and three major catalysts was the cause for this switch up on. One being Toji Zenin, a man without Jujutsu sorcery to back him up, who made Gojo experience failure and defeat for the first time in his life, which led Gojo to his death and his inevitable revival, and something that the fans have now affectionately called Gojo's awakening. Number two on this list being Riko Amane, the star plasma vessel, who affairs Gojo was very indifferent to, even somewhat cold, and this reflects his previous statements of protecting the weak, and he feels it being a hassle. But later on down the line, Gojo realizes that just because someone's worth isn't tied solely to their strength, that doesn't mean that they are a bad person or that they are a hassle. You can actually see that Gojo starts to warm up to Riko and her presence and her outlook on life itself. But those two aren't the major catalyst. The third one here is the factor which turns Gojo's mentality. Geto Sugru had the opposite mentality of Gojo, someone who was adamant on protecting the weak and was dealt an extreme amount of pain from non-sorcerers and quote-unquote weak humans who Geto decided the world would just simply be better off without, leading Geto and Gojo to eventually part ways after having a discussion and calling into question Gojo's entire being. Are you the strongest because you're Satoru Gojo, or are you Gojo Satoru because you are the strongest? And this question right here, on top of Riko's death, Toji's attack, and Geto's departure, and outright just U-turn in morality, it called into question Gojo's entire being. A man whose very birth literally changed the balance of power within the world, and he had so much resting on his shoulders to carry the society of Jujutsu, but within this space of a year found himself defeated by a non-sorcerer, unable to protect someone who he was supposed to, and unable to save his best friend from becoming literally the worst version of himself. He became a racist. That's really bad. Don't become a racist. That's really, really bad. Don't do that. All of these moments led Gojo down the path of trying to discover who he was all over again. And eventually, he landed on the plan of wanting to reset the Jujutsu world from the top down. And he planned on doing this by raising strong allies. And now, this is headcanon from me, from yours truly. But looking back on this story, it made me believe that Gojo's plan to do this was so he didn't have so much pressure on him and his shoulders, and instead could rely on others to help change the Jujutsu world. But he needed them to be on the level of him. They needed to be just as strong as Gojo. But even still, throughout all of this, Gojo was still labeled the strongest, but he still failed due to being human and due to the perspective shift that he had within his teenage years by Geto. You see, I'm a firm believer that had Gojo stuck to his ideals of looking at the weak as the weak and being bothered by protecting them, I feel eventually Gojo would have most likely went down the same sort of path as Sukuna. Maybe not as vicious and dark and evil, but I feel the power that Gojo would have gained from just straight out ignoring everyone else and only focusing on himself in this regard would have most likely led him on the same path to Sukuna. And that's where the two are very, very similar. The parallels between these two, especially later on in the story, are very, very apparent. But But these scars, these wounds, they all come to a head in Shibuya when Gojo was ultimately sealed by Kenjaku, the one who had taken on Geto's body and eventually concocted a plan to seal Gojo away. And he took advantage of Gojo's unresolved past with Geto and also the conflict within himself, because he knew Gojo was literally just simply too strong to fight in a 1v1. He just straight up said, no, I don't want that smoke. So instead, Kenjaku preyed on Gojo's complex nature and his personality of him wanting to be alone so he could operate at the best by himself. And this is something that 3 times within the series has come back to haunt Gojo, with him being unable to accept others' help for fear of them getting in his way, or simply just him shouldering the burden of being the strongest and not having to rely on anyone else. After losing to Toji, him being sealed in Shibuya was the second time that Gojo had failed in a big way that caused incredible ripples throughout the Jujutsu Kaisen world, and it affected everyone far and wide, like literally everyone right over to the US of A, which I think is kind of crazy. And had Gojo not been sealed, Nanami would have more than likely survived Nobara 2, Yuji probably wouldn't have turned into Sukuna, and the Culling Games as a whole wouldn't have ever been started, thus potentially leading to Sukuna not being able to take over Megumi. You see, Gege Akutami as a whole has done an incredible job with a character as complex as Gojo Satoru, and in the most recent chapters is where Gojo's greatest failure and defeat happened. It was also the biggest in-depth look into Gojo's character as a whole, and that was where that was given. In chapter 236 is where Gojo was ultimately defeated by Sukuna in a fight that lasted 13 chapters and literally changed the face of Shounen. This fight was trending every week, and when the chapter launched, there was literally memorials happening in real life for Gojo's passing. I would challenge you to find me another character where this happened, where real life memorials were made for an anime character like this, because in all my time of watching anime and reading manga, I have never seen an impact of a character's death like this. Even stuff within One Piece with Ace's death, or there's no death in the top of my mind right now that comes to this level where I think, holy fuck, there was real life memorials that happened for this. But with chapter 236 opening up with Gojo sat within the afterlife or limbo talking to Geto about fighting Sukuna, it's here we see Gojo finally starting to come to terms with himself and his identity crisis, that Geto's question that had haunted him all this time. Are you the strongest because you're Satoru Gojo, or are you Gojo Satoru because you are the strongest? And Gojo goes on to talk about how fighting Sukuna was fun, but he felt sorry for Sukuna because he, more than anyone, understands Sukuna's solitude, with Gojo saying how he loves everyone now, but somewhere along the line there was a line drew, not as a human, but as a living creature. And it's at this point you start to see where Gojo arrived at the ideals that led him to believe protecting the weak was a pain, because at a certain point he really didn't see himself as a human or as a curse, but instead just this anomaly of a living being, which in the grand scheme of things makes sense. It makes sense for Gojo's character to be like this. No other human like Gojo has been around before, and not that we're aware of. The only other example of this, even remotely close, is Sukuna, but where Sukuna and Gojo differ is Sukuna was able to forget his humanity and leave it behind and burn everything in his way in order to attain a higher power, whereas Gojo was content with being the strongest as he was and instead sought a path for getting his allies stronger and wanted to foster those stronger allies so that one day the Jujutsu society could be changed and the burden wouldn't just have to rely solely on one person. And even with all of Gojo's power, at the most important moments he ended up falling short and failing and letting down those who counted on him. But does that make Gojo a bad character? Absolutely fucking not. It makes him human. And at a certain point, Gege created a belief system within Jujutsu Kaisen, and that belief system was basically revolved around Gojo being the strongest and relying on him to uphold that system. At a certain point, Gojo was revered as a Superman type figure. If I can't deal with it, more than likely Gojo will be able to deal with it. But Gege went the route of, instead of having Gojo solve all the problems, 9 times out of 10 he would fail. And Gojo failing when he was needed the most doesn't make him a bad character at all. I think when you write a character like Gojo, you need to give him these absolutely insane powers that are almost metaphorically represent Gojo as the pinnacle of power in the sense that no one could literally touch him, literally or metaphorically, because of his abilities. And the best way you get around that type of character, that type of trope, that archetype of character, is making them a complex character. One that, while they are the strongest in the verse, they are also just a regular human, and they're still faced with the same pain and life lessons that we all go through and that the other characters go through. And to that extent, I think Gege Akutami did an incredible job of reinventing the wheel in that regard, and that trope, and that happens within most battle manga and shonen series nowadays. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I think it was a reinvention of the wheel when it comes to the strongest tropes of characters, and I think that's what made his death hit so much harder right now. There are many fans that are literally grieving. They are coming up with incredibly insane, wonderful theories on how Gojo may come back through the cycle of rebirth, going north. There's so many theories about Gojo's potential return because his sudden and untimely death caught everyone by surprise, and that's something that Gege does perfectly within his series. He encapsulates death perfectly within the series. It's not something that is supposed to be beautiful and you know, wanted upon. It is always something that happens at the most unpleasant and inconvenient times for everyone that is involved with that character, and especially within a series of Jujutsu Kaisen where the pacing of the story moves on so fast that those deaths don't even have time to sit and simmer. Sometimes, and a lot of time within real life, those events happen to most of us. You don't get time to sit down and simmer on things that have happened because life just moves so fucking fast, and Gege encapsulates that perfectly. And I think that's one of the things that I truly love about this manga. It's one of the things I truly love about Jujutsu Kaisen as a whole. But that is everything from me. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's something that I've had cooking up in my head. It's something I've wanted to do for a long time now, but now that Gojo's character arc is kind of wrapped up, it's nice to see that. And I wouldn't mind at the end of the series going back and revisiting it, because I've got a feeling that Gojo will most likely come back, not as a literal embodiment of him, but I will feel like we will probably see more of an in-depth look into his character in maybe flashbacks through other characters and stuff like that. But I hope you enjoyed this video. I had a fun making this, and if you haven't already, consider subscribing, because, you know, it always helps me out. And let me know what you think in the comments below. And as always, I will catch you guys all in the next one. Much love, big kisses,